The cool evening breeze brushed against Daniel's face as he stepped out of the taxi, his heart pounding in anticipation. The streetlights flickered, casting long shadows on the familiar house in front of him. After months of deployment, this was the moment he had dreamed of. Wrapping Emily in his arms, feeling her warmth, hearing her whisper how much she had missed him. A smile tugged at his lips as he adjusted his duffel bag over his shoulder and walked up to the front door. He took a deep breath before knocking. No response. Strange. She always answered quickly. He tried again. This time the door creaked open, revealing Emily standing there, her face pale, her expression frozen. "Daniel." Her voice was barely above a whisper. His heart swelled, expecting her to jump into his arms. But she didn't. She stood there, gripping the doorframe as if she needed support. His smile faltered. "Hey, babe." Surprise. Emily's lips parted, but no words came out. Her eyes darted behind her for a split second before she stepped aside. "Why, you're home early." Daniel walked in, immediately noticing something felt off. The air smelled different, like a cologne he didn't recognize. The lights were dim, the curtains drawn, and a wine glass sat on the coffee table. Just one, but the way Emily hurried to pick it up made his gut twist. "You okay?" he asked, dropping his bag. She forced a smile. "Yeah, just surprised. I wasn't expecting you yet." Daniel chuckled, though it felt hollow. That was kind of the point. He reached for her, but she hesitated before leaning into his embrace. She felt stiff, like she wasn't sure how to react. His brows furrowed. The house felt different. Not just in the way things were arranged, but in the energy. Something unspoken lingered in the air. He tried to shake it off, blaming it on exhaustion, but his instincts, the ones honed by years in the military, told him something wasn't right. Emily pulled away too quickly, tucking a strand of hair behind her ear. "You must be exhausted. Want me to make you something to eat?" He studied her. She wasn't looking at him. She was fidgeting, her fingers playing with the hem of her oversized sweater. A sweater he didn't recognize. Daniel's gaze flickered to the hallway leading to their bedroom. The door was slightly ajar. The sheets looked rumpled. His stomach tightened. He turned back to Emily, forcing a smile. "Sure. I'd love that." She nodded too quickly, disappearing into the kitchen. Daniel took a slow breath, glancing at the stairs again. His gut told him to check. His heart told him to trust. He wasn't sure which one was right. Daniel sat on the couch, his hands resting on his knees, eyes scanning the room with quiet intensity. Something was wrong. The unease in his chest hadn't faded. If anything, it grew stronger with every passing second. The scent of unfamiliar cologne lingered, subtle but unmistakable. His gaze flickered to the coffee table. Emily had taken the wine glass, but a faint ring of condensation remained. His fingers drummed against his knee. He told himself he was overthinking. Deployment had messed with his head. He needed to let it go. But then his eyes landed on something else, a gray hoodie draped over the armrest. He knew every piece of clothing Emily owned, and that wasn't hers. It wasn't his either. His breath slowed. His fingers curled into fists. Emily walked back in, carrying a plate of food. "Here," she said, placing it on the table with a smile that didn't quite reach her eyes. Daniel nodded, but his focus was elsewhere. His mind raced through explanations. Maybe a friend had visited, maybe she had borrowed it. He wanted to believe that. He reached for the hoodie, lifting it slightly. "Whose is this?" Emily froze. Just for a second. Just long enough. "Oh, she swallowed. "My cousin's. He came over last week and forgot it." Daniel turned it over in his hands. It smelled like aftershave. Not the kind her cousin used. His stomach churned. He set it down, watching her carefully. "Your cousin?" She forced a laugh, brushing her hair back. "Yeah. You remember Jake, right?" He did. And Jake hadn't visited in years. Silence stretched between them. Emily shifted under his gaze. Why are you looking at me like that? Daniel exhaled through his nose. He wanted to believe her. He really did. But then a buzz broke the quiet. A phone vibrated on the counter. Emily's. She stiffened. Daniel's eyes flicked to the screen before she could grab it. Message preview flashed. 3 words that sent ice through his veins. Miss you already, red heart. His pulse pounded in his ears. His hands clenched. The room felt too small, too suffocating. Emily snatched the phone, pressing it to her chest. It's not what you think. His voice was eerily calm. Then tell me what it is. She swallowed hard, stepping back. Daniel, please. The taste of betrayal burned on his tongue. He looked at her, really looked at her. The nervous glances, the forced smile, the hesitation at the door. It all clicked. He had been gone for months. And someone else had filled his place. Daniel's jaw tightened as he stared at her, the weight of the message crushing down on him. His breath felt heavy, his body rigid, but his voice remained coldly steady. Who is he? Emily shook her head quickly. It's not. He. His tone left no room for lies. Tears welled in her eyes. Daniel, I. Say his name. Her lips trembled, but no words came out. The silence told him everything. His chest rose and fell in measured breaths. His hands balled into fists at his sides. He forced himself to stay still, to keep his voice controlled. How long? She wiped at her face, looking anywhere but at him. It wasn't supposed to happen. How long? He repeated, his voice sharper. Beat of silence. Then barely a whisper. 3 months. A bitter laugh escaped him. 3 months. While he was out there, counting down the days to see her, she had already moved on. I didn't plan this, she pleaded. I was lonely, Don't. The word cut through the air, final and sharp. Don't make excuses. Tears streaked down her face. I love you, Daniel. I do. He let out a slow, humorless chuckle. Love. He shook his head, stepping back. That's not love. She reached for him, but he moved away. The distance between them felt wider than ever. You should have told me, he said, voice low. You should have ended it. I didn't want to lose you. You lost me the moment you let him touch you. Emily broke down, sobbing into her hands, but Daniel felt numb. The house he had longed to return to no longer felt like home. The woman he had fought for, dreamed of, no longer felt like his. His mind raced through memories, her laugh, her whispered promises, the way she used to look at him. Every single one of them. Who is he? He asked again, though he already knew he wouldn't like the answer. She hesitated, then whispered a name. Familiar name. Friend. His stomach turned. It wasn't just betrayal, it was a knife in the back. Something inside him snapped. He turned away, running a hand through his hair, trying to steady himself. Unbelievable. Emily sobbed harder, reaching for him again. Daniel, please. He exhaled long and slow. The anger, the heartbreak, it was all too much. He needed space. He needed air. Without another word, he walked toward the door, leaving her cries behind him. The night air was cold against Daniel's skin as he stepped outside. His hands clenched at his sides. His mind felt like a battlefield. Anger, betrayal, heartbreak, all crashing into each other with no way to make sense of it. He had thought coming home would be the end of his loneliness. Instead, it was the beginning of something worse. His fingers grazed the ring on his hand, the one that once felt like a promise, now nothing more than a reminder of what was lost. He twisted it slowly, staring down at the metal, wondering if it had ever meant anything at all. Behind him, the door creaked open. Soft footsteps. He didn't turn. Please don't go. Emily's voice was small, broken. Daniel exhaled, eyes fixed on the empty street ahead. Why? Because I love you, she whispered. He let out a bitter chuckle, shaking his head. You don't do this to someone you love. She stepped closer. It was a mistake. I was lonely, You weren't the only one who was lonely. His voice was sharper now, the restraint slipping. Do you think I didn't miss you? That I didn't struggle? That I didn't spend every damn night wishing I was here? He turned then, eyes dark with hurt. The difference is, I waited for you. Tears streamed down her face. I'll do anything. Please just don't leave. He studied her, searching for something. Remorse, truth, the woman he thought he knew. But all he saw was someone who had already made her choice. His voice was quiet when he spoke. You already lost me, Emily. Her breath hitched. Daniel. He pulled off the ring, letting it rest in his palm for a moment before placing it on the step between them. She stared at it, hands trembling. We can fix this. He took a step back. No, we can't. The reality of it settled in her eyes, the finality of his decision hitting her all at once. She sobbed, reaching for him one last time, but he didn't move. For a moment, neither of them spoke. Just silence, heavy and unforgiving. Then he turned, walking toward the street without looking back. The door stayed open behind him, but he knew there was nothing left to return to.